Good morning, everyone. My name is Maki Hsieh. I'm the president and CEO of the Asian Hall of Fame, and we are delighted to host our annual policy forum. This year, we are joined by distinguished leaders in the state of Washington, Senator Manka Dhingra, who is also chair of the Law and Justice Committee, Chief of Police Adrian Diaz of the Seattle Police Department, and back again for our second year prosecuting attorney's office and hate crimes co-lead of King County, Yessenia, Manzo. We also wanted to reiterate just how important hate crime and hate incidences justice and public awareness is for the Asian Hall of Fame. We're known to elevate Asian excellence and inductees from around the world. So a lot of people don't connect glamour and sequence with justice, but we do believe that with our microphone and elevated platform, we're able to really move the needle in helping to deter violence and reduce crime. And because of that, this year, we are very serious about initiating a public awareness campaign called Make Hate Crime a Crime, or something maybe that's a little bit more friendly, but in essence, encouraging citizens of Washington, California, and elsewhere to report crimes as they see it and understand the importance of reporting hate incidences in their community with the kind of resources that they will receive from public sources. The sixth generation Robertson Foundation is one of the first Asian philanthropies in the United States, and we are so honored that Robertson Foundation is the impetus and the funder behind the forum series. And we wanted to welcome Karen Wong today, who is going to say hello, and also welcome all of her friends who are on the panel today. Chairman Wong.
Thank you, Maki. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our hate crime forum today. You know, in 1960, when my father, Robert Chin, founded the first Asian bank in the United States, United Savings Bank, he really wanted to help the Asian community. And by giving loans and having people own their own homes and businesses, it just provided such a stable environment and good citizenship in our society for many, many years. I also decided to follow him in a way, and it has in his inspiration in a different way. I founded the Asian Resource Center, which was a cultural center. And that center, we taught understanding and values of our community to others. And I also founded the Asian Hall of Fame, which elevates Asian contributions to the United States and the world to help overcome anti-Asian bias. This Making Hate Crime a Crime initiative is a continuation of our efforts to reduce crime against Asians, which still prevails today. Our hope is that this initiative encourages law enforcement agencies and the legislature to make sure that hate crimes are reported as hate crimes. Thank you.
My grandmother used to help survivors of domestic violence back in the day when the phrase domestic violence wasn't even around, where people didn't really understand what that was. And, you know, I call her a feminist. I don't know if she ever used that word herself. And so it's very important for me growing up that I be a voice for survivors of gender-based violence. So I helped create CHIA, which is now AAPI CHIA, which helps survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking. And so I started working at the prosecutor's office, you know, with that passion. And, you know, I come from a proud Sikh family, and then 9/11 happened. And we had our first Sikh driver in Seattle be assaulted. So I was actually on the panel, on the Seattle Police Department's Advisory Council on Muslim Arab Sikh Advisory Council to really take a look at hate crimes. Our national election in 2016 actually changed the trajectory of my life. I was invited or had gone to a safety forum at the local mosque in Redmond. And I was there along with 6 of our police chiefs. And I was in this huge hall full of Muslim Americans in my area. And I sat there listening to people ask, whether they should buy a car, whether they should buy a house, because they didn't know if they would be allowed to live in this country anymore. And I remember sitting there thinking, growing up in California, my father, my brother, my father, my grandfather, they all wear turbans, and we've had some incidents, but I never felt that I didn't belong in this country. And so it was 2 months after that my family and I decided that I was going to run for office, because it is so important that people who look like us are represented in the halls of power. And so I ran for office for the very first time and won. And what is really unfortunate is we think of Washington as this progressive state, but I doubled the women of color caucus in the Senate from 1 to 2. I'm glad I doubled the number. We doubled it again the following year to 4. And now we're 6 women of color in the Washington State Senate. So I think a lot of what drives me is speaking up for those who don't have a voice or feel like they don't belong, and really making sure we all understand that this is America and we all belong here.
We would love to hear about your thoughts from your vantage point on how you feel more could be done to deter gun violence and the connectivity between domestic violence, hate crimes, and racially and religiously provoked hate incidences and gun violence, particularly in light of what is happening right now in this country, even 10 days ago, even in the Taiwanese church, and then beyond. I know that Bloomberg just came out with a whole report saying that this marks the 213th mass shooting in the United States this year, and since Columbine in '99, it's 554th school shooting. What are your thoughts in terms of deterring violence?
I'll just say it is truly shocking. It's beyond shocking what is happening in this country. And I just want to be very, very clear that this is a very uniquely American issue. Access to gun is the #1 deterrent to mass shootings. Every other country that has had a mass shooting has figured this out. And we simply cannot seem to be doing that. It really makes me very upset, because we know what the solution is. Weapons of war, because that's what people are using, are weapons of war, not weapons for hunting or weapons for self-defense. These are weapons of war, are readily available in the United States in a way which no other country allows. And I'll say that I was very proud that when I first ran for office, I ran on a gun violence platform. And I remember the political people telling me, oh, no one runs on guns. And I said, this is what the average American cares about. This is what families care about. This is what the mothers who send their children to school worry about. I remember when my children were in elementary school, there are days when I was like, oh my God, do I need to remember what they're wearing in case something happens and I can identify their bodies? That is not a thought we as parents should ever have. We should assume when our child goes to school, that child is going to come home. And so I'll just say I'm proud of the work we have done in Washington. 5 years ago, with my election, the Democrats took control of the Washington State Senate. And just this year, we passed a bill to ban high-capacity magazines, because the only practical reason for having high-capacity magazine is to conduct mass shootings effectively, so you don't have to stop and reload. We've passed universal background checks. We increased the minimum age to purchase semi-automatic weapons to 21. We have extreme risk protection orders in this state. We've created the first ever statewide Office of Firearms Safety and Violence Prevention. That was my bill, really making sure we're taking a look at data and prevention strategies. And we've really done a lot of work in ensuring that those convicted of domestic violence lose the right to possess a firearm. And you had asked about that connection. And anytime these mass shootings happen, people want to know if there was mental illness. And I want to be very, very clear that those individuals who have mental illness are more likely to be victims of crime rather than perpetrators of violence. And that is very important for people to understand that. What we have seen is that a lot of the individuals who actually commit mass shootings have a history of domestic violence. Even in the recent incident, what happened? He shot his grandmother, and then he went to the school. So we really have to take a look at these power and control issues. We have to take a look at domestic violence. And when we talk about power and control, that's the tie-in to hate crimes too. The sense that people think they're losing control and they have to exert power over a different community. And so, we really have to do a much deeper dive into these incidents. And it's very, very easy to say it's mental illness. It's not. there are some deeper, stronger roots that undercut all of this. But what's also important is access to guns. We have to ensure that weapons of war are not readily available in America.
I love what you said there, Senator, and I know that prosecuting attorney Yessenia Manzo, you have a lot of things to say to add to that as well, especially as a hate crimes co-lead. What are your thoughts there, Yessenia, as to how we can deter mass shootings and reduce violence, not only against Asians, but just in our communities?
Well, it's very hard to follow Senator Dhingra. I think she articulated it just so well and well-rounded, addressing multiple issues. And I think, I mean, one, because before I was a prosecutor, I was also a mental health clinician, and I have 10 years of experience in mental health. And it really frustrates me that the stigma that is placed on individuals in the community that struggle with mental illness, and that the immediate response to violence is to say, well, they were mentally ill, and the distortion that then provides. Something that I really value in this role as a hate crimes lead is being able to dispel that and push back when people want pleas or negotiations based on mental health, when their action was out of hatred and animus. It was really hard to look at the news and the clips and these photographs of these children and see it reflect my community. All of them reflect my community. And then to hear when Ted Cruz was pushed by a reporter to say, why do you think this is unique to America, to the US? He wouldn't respond, and his response was anger and saying that that reporter was politicizing this trauma. And I find that really interesting and hypocritical, because when it's convenient, our identities are not to be politicized. And when it's convenient, our identities are politicized. And this isn't about politicizing and who gets to decide, because it's not my community out there saying, don't talk about this. Our community wants to talk about this, and our community wants a solution, but that's not our voice that's out there. And so I think that, again, goes to another point that Senator Dhingra said. It's so important for people of our communities to be in these positions of power, because otherwise there's no voice. No one is actually voicing what our community wants and what our community needs.
Well, I love what you said in terms of standing up and amplifying a platform. It's so important, especially when several folks who have a platform are not being held accountable to the actions that are happening in our country today. With Chief of Police Diaz, you have a couple of themes coming up in a very short period of time of just 15 minutes. What are your thoughts here in terms of how to deter shootings, how to deter crime? Is it access that needs to be looked at? Is it amplifying voices? Is it taking a look at the role that mental health plays? And actually, we should not bring that into our conversation when we're talking about crime. I think that those are all really valid points in terms of also helping Asian Hall of Fame craft our public awareness campaign. What are your thoughts there, Chief of Police Diaz?
I think Senator and Prosecuting Attorney covered quite a bit. So I couldn't agree more. When you look at shootings like this, where you have this young person that kills or shoots his grandma, it makes a planned attack, goes down to a school with a vest. This isn't about mental health. To me, this is actually about evil. And we know that, and we have to really distinguish the two. We, are dealing with, as a Seattle Police Department, are dealing with people in crisis all the time, and they're not committing violence, and they're not, going out and shooting young people. And we have, I believe there was a report that said that there was more guns than there was people in population in America. This last year, or the last 4 years, we've recovered over 4,500 guns in this city. And many of these guns are used in sometimes violent encounters or crime. And we need to be able to take those guns off the streets. We need to make sure that people don't have access to guns, and that we are addressing people's well-being and mental health. And I am concerned, as COVID has, really changed the dynamic of our own mental health. I think that it's isolated a lot of people, and we're seeing an increase in road rages where people are acting out, or allowing themselves to get aggravated in a very, very short-tempered manner. And so things that they normally wouldn't have done, they're doing now. And I think that that's a big concern. But I also don't want to get it convoluted to, a shooting like a mass shooting like Buffalo, where it's very focused on hate, where you have the Vietnamese church shooting where it's focused on hate, and you have a shooting like this. It isn't a mental health thing. People are planning out to harm others, and we have to be able to call that out.
Chief of Police, is this a new thing? Is this something that's been happening for a while where the hate crime, hate incidents is tied to guns? Or is this something that's been happening for centuries and we're just hearing about it now because of the media? What are your thoughts there?
Over the course of my career, I think that we have seen, guns used at every level of hate crime throughout the 25 years that I've been a police officer. I think now we are starting to experience much more injuries and much more impact in our communities. From you look at Las Vegas, where you had hundreds of people shot, to these instances where you've got Buffalo, Charleston, even in our city. I mean, I have to always be able to make sure that people acknowledge like what is actually happening in our community. Just the other night, I had in one incident 50 rounds being fired in one incident. And that creates a lot of trauma in our community. That creates a lot of, huge impacts, not only for the community or for our young people. And so people have just readily been able to just, you pick up a gun and use it. And that is the growing concern. But if you add hate on top of that, the impact that it has is massive. And we're starting to see, over the last 2 years, our hate crimes increase. But now having access to guns, we've actually seen more guns being purchased over the last several years. And I think this is only the start
I think
of
it's
a
the start.
situation, of a
Yes.
situation that I think could be even worse for us in our society for the next several years. But you have to be accountable for every round that goes down range. And even if you shoot up in the air, those rounds have to come down somewhere. And those, when you point your gun at somebody and you shoot, like, do you know your backdrop? Is there innocent children or innocent people around? And so it is, I don't want to just give that
Right.
level of idea that it would be something that is justified, because if you end up shooting him after he did, shoot somebody, and you end up shooting him, but a round goes down range and it hits a 5-year-old kid, like you are still going to have to answer to that, that crime. And so so scenarios like that become very, very complicated. I think what it really is a greater discussion is number one, how do we get guns off the street? How do we get it out of the hands of people that should not have guns? And I think that there's, I think Senator has been a part of that extreme risk protection order, and really trying to figure out how do we, go to court, put in an order, get a judge to say, look, the police go and pick up these guns because this person shouldn't have access to them. And I think that is a start into the right direction. I'm actually on the board for the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, and I've advocated for safe storage, trying to make sure that we don't have ghost guns out there, that we are, authorizing police officers to, be able to use extreme risk protection orders to take guns off the street. And I think that there's a whole host of things that we can do to really make sure that you're not into a situation like that.
The chief of police, it sounds like even one round shot is not okay. Even one hate incident is not acceptable. And one hate crime is definitely not America. This is just not okay. We don't want this in our communities. That's pretty much what the public awareness campaign should be. It's not. None of this is okay. This is not Netflix, movie time. None of this is okay.
100%. And I think, America is better than this. We're better than this. I mean, I think just in general, we have to be able to figure out how do we all live in this world today? And how do we all figure out how we interact with people and how do we support each other, and rather than find ourselves resulting to some level of violence or power or anything else that's affecting our community.
It reminds me of a decision that was made in Toppenish School District, I believe it was in 2018, where they passed a policy allowing 2 individuals on all school campuses in Toppenish to be armed with a firearm. Students would not know who it was. Their training was absolutely minimal. And I just thought, what a just frightening concept to know that there are 2 teachers, staff, we don't know who, on every campus, including elementary schools, middle school, high school, and we don't know who is armed. And somehow that is supposed to make students and families feel safer when you have the example, like just happened in Texas, law enforcement shows up and they are outside of that school for 40 minutes at least, probably up to an hour. Those are trained individuals, armed, and the help, that scenario of if I'm armed, I can help, that didn't happen. So it's this hypothetical that I think creates a lot of problems when the solution is people not having access to weapons of war.
What are some of the things that we can do more to encourage communities to report hate incidences, hate crime, and ultimately how it ties into gun violence and not owning a gun, not shooting that round?
That's such a great question, Maki, and I'll agree with what the chief and Prosecutor Manzo said. Introducing a weapon into any scenario just escalates it to an extent that is not needed. So please, no one start introducing more weapons into any scenario. But when I gave my introduction, I started off by talking about the Muslim, Sikh, Arab Advisory Council I was involved with after 9/11, and then I mentioned the hate crime seminar. Well, I did mention the one I went to for Indian Association of Western Washington, but the safety forum at the mosque, and those things were over a decade apart. And I can tell you there was a huge difference from that advisory council to these other meetings I attended. And the first advisory council that I went to, they were very contentious. There were people, there was distrust, there was fighting, it just wasn't, it was a very stressful environment. Fast forward to going to this event in 2016, and the environment was very, very different. People showed up with trust. We had 6 of our police chiefs show up, and there was this trust in that community. And so the way we deal with hate crime is actually with love, with establishing relationships, with establishing trust. And we have to really understand and acknowledge, and I think this is what's important for any public campaign to say, is that the hate crimes aren't just these horrific acts of violence that impact the directed victim and their families. They actually poison our entire society because it makes the entire community feel unsafe. So it's not just directed to that individual, it is really directed to that entire community. And that solution is not just to bring that one person to justice, but it is really making sure that everyone else in the community stands up and denounces the ugly hatred behind them. So to me, it's not just, we have to fight against Asian hate. We have to fight against hate as we see in any community and stand there in solidarity when we see its ugly head being reared. And so that it really is this community that comes together in love and in support and says, not this time, not within our community, there's zero tolerance for it. So we have to make sure we are always showing up in solidarity to anyone that this is targeted towards. And one of the other things we have to inform people is, even if they're walking down the street and someone says a racial slur, they may not feel threatened, but it is important to identify and report that. So any incidents of hate have to be simply reported, because it is important for us to capture that, because that same individual may go ahead and do something else in the future. But we have to make sure we're all standing up, we're standing up in solidarity, and that the person who reports it, people feel ashamed. They themselves feel bad for being attacked that way. But that's where we have to make sure we're supporting them.
Senator Dhingra, you echoed exactly what California panelists said, which is even if you have a racial slur or it's a little harassment, you don't think it's a big deal, you don't think it's going to make a difference. It absolutely does. That person may commit a larger crime. He may actually go and purchase a gun. You don't know what you are preventing, number one. Number two, if you report incidences, it helps with the data. It helps with the district analysis of what funding and resources they can request from the states. It's really important to report incidences and crime in your community, and it's a collaborative effort. It's not something to be ashamed of. This is such an important conversation, and I feel like I would love to, when the dust settles, do more work with your office and with the chief of police, and of course with King County in terms of putting together a campaign that really move the needle. I hope that you say yes, and I look forward to reaching out to you. For our closing, Senator, what is one change that you feel from your vantage point for your decades of experience that could be implemented to deter violence and turn the tide of hate? Access is one. The second, which I think is so important because mental illness is always that, oh, well, the gunman was mentally ill, or, you know, we just have to give them some space and some counseling and then it'll go away. I think that this message, it's a difficult message because we do want to be respectful, right, of the patient, but we also want to make sure that people are held accountable. So that's the second piece, is the mental illness piece, which is a difficult one. Are there any other changes you feel, Senator, that could be implemented to deter violence?
You know, absolutely. I think it was in the 90s or late 80s where there was a national ban on assault weapons in America. It was for 10 years. I think it's really important to see how many mass shootings did we have during that period. Not a lot. That ban expired after 10 years. And so I think we really have to take a serious look at that again. And the other thing we have to really understand is that, you know, we have these periods in time where hate crime escalates. And this is where the rhetoric and the narrative is really, really important. It is not okay for people to talk about hate and bigotry and be racist. And it seems like in the last 5 years, we as America have started tolerating this discourse. And I think it is very important for each of us to take personal responsibility that when we hear people being racist or saying things like that, that we call them out on it. It should no longer be acceptable to hear this as public discourse. There is a huge issue with a lot of white supremacists feeling that it is okay for them to espouse hatred. And we as Americans have to just stand up and say, no, that is not okay. It is not acceptable. And so my call out is to actually individuals to really start changing that culture, because it is that energy you put out in the world that you get back. And when we are showing up with tolerance, when we're showing up with grace, that is how we all want to be treated. And I think it's very important for each of us to emulate that and hold others to account for the same thing. And I wouldn't be a politician without saying that. Make sure you're registered to vote, and make sure you go vote. Vote for people who share your values.
That's important. My mother has 2 masters and a PhD in East Asian law. She did not register to vote until she was 74 years old because she said she did not want people to know about her business or dig into what she voted for or against. And I said, well, we all know what you stand for. Why don't you register to vote? She said, well, I don't want people knowing about my business. And I think that is another very clear program that could be pushed, which is please register to vote, because your platform and your amplification of your values cannot be heard without that vote. The second thing is the racial replacement theory of how that is scientifically proven somehow and justifies this movement against diversity, movement against it justifies a movement against oppressing voices, American voices that should be heard. It's troubling, and it's been going on for quite some time, really escalating, as you said, Senator, in the last 5 years. And I think continuing really with a lot of power this year. You're seeing quite a lot of that. The racial replacement theory, maybe it's not as strong in Washington State and in the Pacific Northwest in California, but it's something to really watch out for. So really thank you for bringing that to our attention. Yessenia, what do you feel in terms of one thing from your vantage point that could be done to deter violence? We talked about access. We talked about, Not a single assault rifle or weapon on campus is not even one. That's not, none of that is okay. What are some additional thoughts in terms of the hate crimes and as co-lead of that in King County that you can offer in terms of turning the tide of hate incidences against our communities?
So I'll narrow it down to prosecution, the role of prosecution, and three things come up. One is we did touch on, but I just wanted to expand a little bit on the importance of reporting bias incidents. And it is very frustrating that to experience a bias incident and then also understand that doesn't necessarily make it a hate crime. However, it does not diminish the trauma, it does not diminish the experience, and it does not diminish the importance of reporting those bias incidents, and actually have an example, a recent example of where the community did report bias incidents to SPD, because SPD is the only law enforcement agency in this area that has a detective specifically dedicated to hate crimes. And she has set up a system where these bias incidents are reported, and she identifies them. And it helped to identify an individual who had been out in the community committing, bias against multiple different community members, and eventually did commit a hate crime. And the only reason why the detective was able to identify that individual was because of the previous bias incident reports. And it turned out that this was his actual second hate crime that he had committed. And in this incident, he committed a hate crime against two individuals. So while he had received a reduction before, it allowed for all of that information, allowed for the process to end where he had to come forward before, well, he didn't have to, but he came forward before a court and he pled guilty as charged to a felony hate crime. And that was very empowering to the victims. And that wouldn't have been possible without people reporting bias incidents and without a mechanism for them to report those incidents. So I would like to see more law enforcement agencies and more ways in the community, not just limited to law enforcement, where we can start identifying these bias incidents. And then the second part, or another thing that comes up, is how important education is in reaching out to the community. Like Senator Dhingra said, really building trust. Part of what I really want to happen is for certain communities, specifically the immigrant communities, to know that reporting a hate crime will not lead to them being in trouble, that we are not interested in identifying their citizenship status, that they're not putting themselves or their family at risk, that this really is about our goal to hold people accountable, and that nobody should be a victim of a hate crime. And then the third part that comes up is I really think we need funding for a hate crime prosecutor. Right now we have two of us who do this in addition to our current role. And honestly, there's no way that we can do the work justice unless we have a prosecutor that's specifically dedicated to hate crimes.
So a hate crime prosecutor, that would really help move the needle. And then you mentioned that SPD has a dedicated detective, was it, who specializes in hate incidences and bias incidents. So this needs to be something in the forefront for nationwide. I think that would be amazing in terms of deterring crime. And the third, which I starting to percolate in my mind, is if there was an awareness campaign that all of these incidences lead to this shooting. That seems to be the overall message, is all of these little things you think are not important, actually it's going to lead to this big shooting that you can prevent. That seems to me, because you don't just go and buy a rifle and shoot people. You actually, there's a lot of things leading, I'm pretty sure in this person's 18-year young adult life, that he's had a lot of little things that lead to this thing. So that really brings to me the importance of reporting, the importance of prosecution, the importance investigation and added resources and funding to this effort. The Chief of Police, Diaz, we're going to wrap up with you and what your thoughts are. And do you agree with everything that both the senator and the prosecuting attorney said in terms of deterring violence in our communities?
I do. I'm actually the co-chair of a human civil rights committee for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. We know that there, just a couple years ago, there was 5 states still not having any hate crime laws on their books. And now I think we're down to 3, but that just shows you that some states, this isn't necessarily their priority. You have departments that haven't made it a priority of making sure that there is a detective that is investigating it, holding people accountable. You have to be able to, as the prosecuting attorney mentioned, every bias incident, sometimes there's video from those bias instances that eventually lead us to the person that, or show a pattern or practice of this person eventually, committing hate crime. And so all of that plays a role. We need to make sure that we're meeting people's needs and that people are getting services, they're getting access to, so they don't find themselves in a level of trauma that they end up finding themselves committing some level of crime. And I think that's just as a whole. I mean, I think we have to figure out, how do we heal as a community? I think, how do we actually support our young people? Because I think our young people have a level of resiliency that they can build up, but we need to be able to support that level of them to be able to build that resiliency as well. And I mean, think about it, 21 people shot and killed, 19 of them youth. And now kids are going to school every single day wondering if their school is going to be that target. So we have to really figure out, how do we provide that emotional support for our young people now?
Well, Chief of Police Diaz and Senator Manka Dhingra, Prosecuting Attorney Yessenia Manzo, thank you so much. And also for Chairman of the Board, Karen Wong, for joining us today in this very important policy forum that wraps up AAPI month, unfortunately, on gun violence and hate crimes. I have a feeling that we will be collaborating a lot more on this important topic in the year to come. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.